Alright, hello everyone. It's Pluto, and today I thought I might as well just do a tier list for Wizard101 and Pirate101 Worlds. I had comments to do this before almost a year ago, so I just thought I might as well just do it. So, I made a tier list. I kind of messed up a little bit because I accidentally did Dragonspire twice, so we're just gonna ignore this one, but um, we can start with Wizard City. So, for Wizard City, for me, I think that there are two types of Wizard City. There's the Wizard City before they started changing everything, and then the Wizard City after they started changing the entire world story. And if you're going to consider the Wizard City before, I would say that would be S tier. But the Wizard City after is more like a B tier. So I think I'll average the two out, and I'll give Wizard City an A tier. I think it's a good world. It has good characters. It's a good introduction to the story. The graphics look good nowadays. Before they hadn't, but nowadays they look really good. So Wizard City, I'll give it an A tier. Crocodopia is the first real world of Wizard101 that I don't like. Its storyline is not. Its storyline drags. It's not really a compelling story. It has this sort of hero archetype story, where in which you save a bunch of heroes, and that's the entire purpose of the world, is to try and find all these heroes, which that's something that they do in many different worlds. Most recently they did this in Lemuria, but they do this in a bunch of different worlds too. They do it in Avalon, even in Zafaria they do a similar version of it. Um, but the whole environment of the world is just three different, like, a fiery area, a stormy area, and an icy area, and it really meshes, and it just doesn't look good. The music is alright here, but overall the story and just the overall environment and questline, it's not the best. So I'm gonna give it a D tier. So the next world we have is Wizard101 Marleybone. Wizard101 Marleybone I actually really like. I think that the music here is some of the best in all of Wizard101. I think that the story with Meow-Yardy, with Master breaking Meow-Yardy out of jail to steal a Crackonomicon, that's really good. I like that there's a failure in Cracktopia, which leads up to Marleybone. So on Marleybone, I'm actually going to give an A tier. I think it's a really good questline. It's not too long of a world either. I think it's just about in the area where it might be a little bit too short, but it's still pretty good. Wisteria is a side world. This world really doesn't matter anything to the story. It's an alright, like, little storyline with a tournament, but overall it's not the best world. It's easily skippable. It's not. I would put it a C tier world, honestly. It's not the best. It has good graphics. It's withstood the test of time, but it's not really anything notable. So this might be a really hot take, but I don't actually like Mushu that much in Wizard101. Mushu and Wizard101 really felt like some side quests, and I have the same complaint with Avalon a bit later on, but it felt more of a side quest than it did an actual world. Like, it felt more like we were trying to save the land just for our side quests, not necessarily because we needed to stop Malister or anything. But I do think that it is a bit better, even despite that. I think that it's a B tier world. I don't think it's anywhere near A or S, but I do think that Mushu is pretty good. So I'm gonna give it a B tier. Next we have Dragonspire. So the thing with Dragonspire is the best of Dragonspire is S tier, and then the worst of Dragonspire is F. There are some really, really grindy areas in Dragonspire. I'm looking at the Labyrinth, I'm looking at the Forum, the Crystal Grove. There are some really bad areas that you don't want to be stuck in. But then there are parts of Dragonspire which is awesome. You have the Grand Chasm where you go back in time. You have the Great Spire with Malister and Sylvia. The finale of Wizard101 for the first arc at least. So there are parts of Dragonspire that are really good, but parts that are so bad. So I think I'm going to average it out at a C tier world just because of that alone. I can't put it F because there are parts that are so good that I wouldn't feel comfortable putting it at F, but yeah. Next we have Grizzleheim, and this is going to be Grizzleheim and Wintertusk. So I actually think that Grizzleheim in itself is probably like a D or a C tier world. I don't really have much fun questing through it. You don't get much XP, you don't level up fast. It's just you do it so that you can do Wintertusk, which is actually an A tier I would put for Wintertusk at least. So I'm gonna average it out at a B tier. I think that Drizzleheim, it has its ups and downs, but I think that the only reason people really do Drizzleheim now is to do Wintertusk, and Wintertusk is still good. So I think I'm gonna average the two out at a B tier. Alright, so Celestia is a world that I actually hate. I do not like Celestia whatsoever. I think that the plot of Celestia is boring. There's nothing really introduced. Even at the end, when they do introduce Morganth, she still doesn't really have much of a major impact on the plot until later on in the arc. I don't think Celestia is a good world whatsoever. I think that Celestia fell short and that they didn't really have an overarching villain to tie the plot together. You're mostly just helping the dogs on their excavation of Celestia, but it's a really boring plot. And then on top of that, the underwater aesthetic of the world, it makes it just so bland and boring. It's most of the areas blend together, like how a lot of Arc 1 areas blend together, but at least the environments are prettier. Like in Mushu, the environments are prettier. In Celestia, the environments are just so bland and boring that I don't want to be there. Crustacean Empire and Science Center are two very grindy, very, very bad areas, back to back, which doesn't help. Overall, I think Celestia is not that good. Or I don't think it was done very well. I think they could have done a lot of things better with it. Alright, next up is Zafaria. Zafaria used to be actually a really bad world. Zafaria used to be the world that everyone dreaded to get into because it was the collect quest struggle. Now this was a long time ago. This was really back in the day. Nowadays it's more of it's a much better world nowadays, but still it's not the best. I'm gonna put Zafaria at like a B tier. There are still some quests like the Greyhorn Mercenaries that get very repetitive, but I think Zafaria has some good music. I think it has a good storyline. I think that everything in Zafaria blends well together. I think that the areas are different enough to the point where you're not just gonna get bored of seeing the same thing over and over again. The only thing that I can say is that some of the defeat quests are repetitive, but really it has a good story, it has a good villain. Morganth actually feels like a villain in this world, unlike she did in Celestia. I think Zafaria was done pretty well. I'm gonna put it at a B tier. So Avalon, a lot of people have Avalon as S tier, a lot of people have it as an A tier. I actually have Avalon as a B tier. Where Avalon fell short is that their story was mainly a purpose to add some backstory to Morganth. And which is cool, that's good and all, but when we get to Chrysalis, we'll see that they've done that a lot better in Chrysalis, and they could have done that a lot better in Avalon. The problem with Avalon is that its story is disconnected. No, there is good to Avalon's story. It's a good high point after you had a failure in Zafaria and pretty much a failure in Celestia as well. The Wizard does have a high point in Avalon where you're able to rescue King Artorias, but in Avalon, the problem is that the story is disconnected, in that there's nothing really tying Morganth into the plot. Now, what I mean by that is there's nothing really tying modern Morganth into the plot of Avalon. You fight her in the past, you go to Ghost Avalon, you figure out what she did, but you don't really fight modern era Morganth. You don't really have anything tying her back in besides that part in the beginning in Headmaster's Tower. So that's the problem I have with Avalon. If Morganth was actually a threat in this world and you figure out about her backstory, it's perfect. But they don't do that. They do half of that, and that's why I can never put it as A or S. Now, personally, I think it's actually higher up than I would normally have had it, mainly because the music, the story, the characters, everything else was done so well in Avalon. It's such a bright, vibrant environment. It's really impossible to hate this world, in my opinion. But yeah, that's what I think about Avalon. Alright, so I'm actually going to have Azteca as a D tier world. I can't put it as F tier. I've had this as F tier in the past. I just can't put it there. Now, the problem with Azteca is that they bring Malister back. That's my biggest gripe with it, storyline-wise. However, I do like how Wizard101 gets really dark in Azteca, and they literally have a genocide. Like the wizard's like failure is that he's unable to stop a whole genocide from happening, and that's what Morganth did. She just seems like they make her such a menacing threat to the wizard. So I think that Azteca does get a little bit of credit there. But the problem with Azteca is that, again, you have the Celestia treatment where the areas just mesh together. Now, there are some very beautiful landscapes in Azteca, don't get me wrong. Cloudburst Forest, that waterfall is beautiful. But the problem arises in that Azteca, all these areas, they're all jungly, and you get stuck there for a very long time. The areas are so long, like especially Salt Meadow Swamp and Mangrove Marsh. Those two, like they're so long, and they grind, and it's awful. Azteca has a bunch of those areas in a row, and they don't really change environments until really you get to maybe like Tierra de Bray or the Pitch Black Lake, and by that point, even Tierra de Brea meshes with Cenote, and the Pitch Black Lake just feels like Celestia again. You don't really want to be doing it. You want to get out of the world. And once you do get out of the world, it's just a sad, like, oh, the world's just destroyed now, okay. What was that for? Nothing. That's why Azteca is a bad world. I think that storyline-wise, it could even be like maybe a B tier, but with how they did the questing and how like grindy it is to be in this world, it has to be a D tier world in my opinion. Alright, so next is Aquila. Now Aquila isn't really a world, more of a series of like dungeons with bosses, but I think that the story with the Immortal Games was done pretty well, and I think that the dungeons are beautifully designed, especially Tartarus and Olympus. Atlantia is kind of like just Celestia, but it feels like Celestia Waterworks. Like you don't really like Atlantia is nothing too special about it, but Olympus and Tartarus was done very well. So I'm gonna give Aquila like a C tier world. I think that it's pretty good. I think that the story with the Immortal Games is good too, and the story with the gods that you fight. I think I do like Aquila quite a bit. So this is going to be a very unpopular opinion, but I'm having Chrysalis at S tier. Now I think Wizard101 did everything perfect in Chrysalis. This is when they started introducing main characters. Boom, you have Devon Whiteheart, you have Megalia Spiritcaller, you have Zoltana the Mirror Mask, you have a bunch of different main characters, even Old Cobbett later on. In Chrysalis, they started doing that, and that really helped their stories, because it really made these compelling characters, and when Devon dies, you really feel for him, you really feel for the Borara people, like they lost a warrior, and that's another thing. Chrysalis Part 1 was one of the best stories they have done in this game. It was a war story with the Boraras. You really felt like you were in danger. When you were in the last wood, if you were paying attention to the story, you really felt like tense. Like, oh, I'm in the middle of a war zone here, and the bees from the hive, or the bees from, not the hive, the bees from the Mooncliffs could attack the Boraras at any instant. You really felt for the people there. And in part 2, with the Radiance Reborn and Sardonyx and Conda Desert, you feel like what Morganth has really done to the lands of Chrysalis. Like, she's really damaged them severely. And yes, is it a grindy world? Yeah, it is. But I think that the grind is fine because you have Darkmoor in the middle. You take a break from the grind to farm Darkmoor. Now, I know nowadays you might not farm as much because there's gear in Chrysalis, but regardless, you do take a mini break in Darkmoor, and it does help a little bit with issues with the grind of it. But overall, I think Chrysalis is a pretty fun world. I like Chrysalis. I think it's one of my favorite worlds in the game. It used to be my favorite world in general, not so much anymore, but yeah. And then that brings us to Darkmoor. Darkmoor is another S tier world. Darkmoor, they really made up for what they did in Azteca with bringing Malistaire back. One of the biggest problems with Azteca that I have is the fact that they bring Malistaire back, and they really make up for it in Darkmoor. They give him a final conclusion to his story, and I think that they did it very well. I think that with Malistaire, you have a really compelling character. His quest to try and bring Sylvia back was really compelling in Arc 1. And they ended it perfectly. It felt like Dragonspire again. Really, it felt better than Dragonspire, the ending cutscene with Sylvia. I think that Darkmoor was just handled very well by the KI team. I think that they wrote their wrong, they righted their wrong, and yeah, I think Darkmoor deserves to be with Chrysalis as a very good finale to Arc 2. Alright, now we have Polaris. Polaris is another, I'm going to say, A-tier world. I think they had a lot of pressure on them going into Polaris, going into Arc 3, that they needed to do a good world. And you've come off the heels of Chrysalis, you've come off the heels of Darkmoor. You really needed to do a good world here, and they really did. Polaris is not long. Polaris is short enough to where it's not going to be a grind, but it's long enough to feel like you actually had a compelling story. You have a really compelling villain in that of the Rat, and they introduced Grandfather Spider as a villain too at the end of Chrysalis. So you have that as well. I think Polaris was done very well, and especially for like an ice world. Like we had an ice world in Grizzleheim, or Wintertusk more specifically. So them doing an ice world again, I think that they did it very well. I think that some of the areas are really beautiful. I think Forlorn Tide is one of my favorite areas in game because of how cool it is. The forest and River of Frozen Tears as well. I like that area as well. I think that they just did Polaris very well. All right, the next one is Mirage. So Mirage, I'm actually gonna have as a B tier world. I think they fell flat in Mirage. Is that they tried to do Polaris again, but I don't know. It just doesn't feel as compelling as Polaris did. They had the plot with the house cats, where they do have some of these plots where you have to reunite these orders. Essentially, you have to reunite these people and make them get along so they can stop a threat, and that works to an extent. But Xerxes wasn't the overarching threat. Xerxes, once you stop him in Mirage, it feels like, oh, I'm just done. Like, I just did the entire purpose of the world. Oh, wait, we have this other story with Ali Baboon. Like, where did this come from? This came out of nowhere. And now we have to stop Grandfather Spider because, like, they introduced this side plot with the Troll, which, to be fair, that side plot did become, that side plot introducing the Cabal did have major, like, gripes on the story, but overall, I don't think Mirage was really done to the best that KI could have done it. I think that there are definitely better examples of second world worlds, and by that I mean like worlds that are the second of the arc. I think that they've done it better. So yeah, I think that Mirage could have done. They could have handled this a bit better. Also, another problem I have with Mirage is that the areas do kind of mesh together a little bit. Like, what's the difference between Alkali Burrows and Ruble Waste? You tell me. Like you don't know really the difference between those areas. But when you look at Polaris, like when you look at what's the difference between Walvisquard Harbor and Forlorn Tide, you pretty much know the difference already. You know like how those two areas are different. Or River of Frozen Tears and Forlorn Tide. You really know the difference between those two areas because they're made different. Mirage, it's just desert. There are some unique parts of the desert, but most of the areas are just desert. A very good area of Mirage is Agrabah too, which Agrabah is one of my favorite areas in both games, but yeah. Overall, Mirage fell flat a little bit, but I'd still say it's a good world. Alright, next we have Imperia. Now, Imperia is one of my least favorite worlds of the game. I'm going to put Imperia in D tier. Now, this is Awesome the Sauce's favorite world of the game, and this is a lot of people's favorite worlds as well, and they cite the story with Mallory and the Bat, and they do have points there that there are good character development of those individual characters, and also I do like the whole Star Trek pork and beans and the medulla stuff. I do like that a little bit, but the problem with Imperia mainly comes with, number one, it has a very, very grindy questline. It feels so much longer than it actually is, and the areas are so dark. Now, when Imperia was first coming out, I imagined it was going to be this sky world, very bright, with some dark areas in it, but it was going to be a very bright sky world, clouds, like city in the clouds. But no, when they said dark, they really meant that it was going to be a darker area. It was going to be like a storm a stormy area, which that works to an extent, but when that's the entire world, apart from like one area and that of aeroplanes, it kind of just gets repetitive and gets stale. And also, just some of the areas are very bad. Xanadu is such a boring area to quest in. The aerial jungle is such a boring area to quest in. The only real fun I had in Imperia was in that of Reverie, which that was a good area. But also, Aeroplanes was pretty good. But then you get back to Mandala, and it's just like, oh, this bright area that used to be so cool is now completely destroyed, and it's just stormy again. And then you have to do a jungle and Husk, and I don't know. The areas just get repetitive, and Imperia, it really feels like a very anticlimactic end to an arc. So yeah, I have problems with Imperia. So I think that I have to put it in D tier. Next is Caramel. Now, a lot of people hate Caramel. A lot of people are Caramel haters. They hate the bright colorfulness of this world, and I do see them having a point. But I think that it has to be a C tier world. Now, here's the thing with Caramel. Caramel did not do a very good job of introducing Dasein in the old one, and the main two, Lemuria and Novus, the main two like worlds of their arc. It didn't really do a good job, but it wasn't supposed to. It was mostly set to be a precursor. It was meant to be a really like its own story, and in and of itself, Caramel does have a good story with the corruption of Nana's old-fashioned caramel delights, and the whole malware fun trap, and the witches, and the whole sour gummy story. Those stories were done very well in Caramel. The problem is when they tried to introduce the overarching threat of Dasein, the old one, and they tried to do that in the form of the aberrant paradox, it just didn't work. I think that a better way to introduce it would have been you do fight Nana at the end. Nana's the final boss, and then they find a way to do a cutscene or something, and they introduce him. Or maybe, I don't know. I don't think that they did a good job introducing him and just having you fight him. Especially for a character that isn't really going to be a villain until Novus and Wallaru whenever that comes out. I don't know. I just don't think Caramel was done too well to serve the overarching story, but I do think it had a really good individual story, so I can't really put it at F or D, so it ends up at C. I also have to mention that this area was really hype when it came out. This world was very hype when it came out, so I can't put it really anywhere lower than C in my opinion. So the next world we actually have is Lemuria. So I think Lemuria was actually a really well done world, but the more I've done it, the more I've seen like it's become a little bit more of a B, but I'm still gonna put it in A. I don't feel comfortable putting it in B just yet. The more I do this world, the more I do feel like it becomes more of a B, but I have to put it in A. I think it was really well done. I think that the whole plot with Dasein is just a phenomenal character in Arc 4. His character development in Lemuria, and then eventually Novus, which we'll get to, it's fantastic. I think that the heroes, they have each their individual characters, their individual motives, and I like at the end how you have to fight each of them to stop them because they want to use the world synthesizer for themselves. And I think that Lemuria was just very well done. A lot of people have like the criticism with the retexturing and reuse of models, but I think that it actually serves the story, having a world where it's all of the old worlds combined. I actually really like that a lot. I think Lemuria was a really well done world on the KI team, and I think that they did a very good job in Novus as well. Novus is an S tier world. Novus is actually my favorite world in Wizard101. They did Novus beautifully. Novus was a really good third world of the arc, and depending on how they do Wallaru, this arc could end up becoming like the second best arc in Wizard101. Basically the reason Novus was so good was because they decided to do Pirate 101 in Wizard 101. They decided to do Pirate 101 story with the world powers all against each other in the meanwhile, and then on the other hand, you have Dasein, who is giving all the world powers what they want because he thinks that it's going to make them all happy, but it doesn't. He has a very naive sense of how the world works, and it works very well in Novus. I think that the build up to Dasein, like rejecting the everything, It was beautifully well done. It was very good. I think that Novus is one of the best worlds in this game. And even if it's not your favorite world, you have to admit it was one of the best done worlds in this game. There are minor issues. I do think that they did do some retexturing stuff, which in Lemuria it really worked. In Novus, not as much. But it was mainly from pirates, so a lot of people that played Wiz didn't really like understand it as much, or didn't really like see those areas with the retexturing from before, so they thought it was new. But anyways, it doesn't. I don't really think it matters as much because the world powers are the ones wishing for everything, so it would make sense why it would be textures and stuff from Pirate. So the next world we have actually is Skull Island. Skull Island is beautiful introduction to Pirate. It's an amazing world. Skull Island has some fantastic characters. No matter when you're in Skull Island, it's amazing. It's perfect. I think the story is completely perfect. It's my favorite world in both games, actually. Skull Island is just a perfect world in Pirate. I love it. Manquista is another world that has a really good story in Pirate. Now it's hard to rank the pirate worlds. Mainly, if I were to do this, I would want to do the books because they each have their own stories. But Manquista has a very well done story with the whole Cortez plot and with the Crown being evil and the Crown trying to kill you even though you just helped them. I think Manquista is very well done. Cool Ranch is another example of a really well done world for either game. Cool Ranch, it's very long and it can become grindy at points, but I think the story of each story, besides maybe like the Bison stories, makes up for it. I think that the stuff with El Toro, the stuff with the Doctor of Death for the most part, and the stuff with the Magnificent Seven as well, as well as Captain Blood, I think it's beautiful. It's perfect. I love Cool Ranch. One of my favorite worlds. Pirate 101 Mushu is also a very well done world. It's well done in the fact that they made Mushu absolutely beautiful in Pirate 101, and then they gave it a really compelling story. The two stories of Mushu, the two books, were really well done, especially the first one. The second one was a little bit worse, but I think that the second one was still very good. So Mushu, I'm going to put it as an A. Alright, and then we have Pirate 101 Marleybone, one of my personal favorite worlds of the game, of either game. Pirate 101 Marleybone has a beautiful war story and amazing, very compelling plot there with Nelson, and you have Rook, and the only part where it really fell flat was with the foxes. I think that the radicals, it made it fall flat a little bit, but you had some character development with Bonnie Ann and the other people in there, and as the pirate. So yeah, I think Pirate 101 Marleybone was a very well done world in that with Rook, and the finale with Rook and the fight with Nelson is amazing. I love it. So the only really world that I don't like in Pirate is going to be Aquila. I think Aquila in Pirate is a C tier world. I think that Aquila kind of, you start to feel the grind. It does have good stories in it, don't get me wrong. The problem I have with Aquila is that it really starts becoming grindy, like with Ilios, especially. You have a really heavy collect quest area there. So I think that Aquila, it becomes a C tier because it drags, but I still think it's a pretty good world overall. I still do like Aquila, and I still do like questing through it for the most part. And then we have Valencia. Now, Valencia is notorious for being rushed, but I love the Valencia music. It's my favorite music in either game. And Kane as a villain queen, the Armada, it's perfect. I love them. I love Valencia Part 1 and I love Valencia Part 2. I don't care if it's unfinished. I know I get the complaints, but I love Valencia and Pirate. I think it's one of the best worlds in either game. I think that it's second only to Skull Island. Second only to Skull Island. It's such an amazing world, and I just had wished that they had finished it. That's what I wished for. I wish that TI had finished it because it would have been maybe my favorite world in either game. So anyways, this is it for my tier list. So in S tier we have Chrysalis, Darkmoor, Novus, Skull Island, Pirate 101, Marleybone from Pirate, and Valencia. In A tier we have Wizard City, Marleybone from Wiz, Polaris, Lemuria, Cool Ranch, and Mushu from Pirate. B tier we have Mushu from Wiz, Grizzleheim, Zafaria, Avalon, Mirage, and Manquista. C tier, we have Wisteria, Dragonspire, Aquila, Caramel, and Aquila from Pirate. D tier, we have Crocotopia, Azteca, Imperia, and then in F tier, we unfortunately have Celestia. So that's it for my tier list. Thank you for watching. If you agree with me, please leave a comment below. If you don't agree with me, also leave a comment below. Tell me what you disagree with. Tell me where you would put your rankings. And anyways, I'll see you in the next video. Have a happy new year. This will probably be my last video of 2022. So have a happy new year. Please subscribe. Please like. Do whatever. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys.